I came home early, expecting a quiet night. Instead, I found her in bed. With him. The bedroom was dimly lit, the scent of expensive perfume thick in the air mixed with the unmistakable musk of betrayal. The silk sheets were tangled, the evidence of their passion still fresh. Vanessa's eyes went wide with panic as she realized who was standing at the door. Her hands shot up to cover herself, but it was too late for modesty. Patrick, the fool she had risked everything for, scrambled, his body half covered in the sheets, looking like a rat caught in a trap. Vanessa's lips parted, the beginnings of an excuse forming on her tongue, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. I didn't ask why. I didn't shout. I didn't demand an explanation. There was no need. The truth was already laid bare before me in all its filthy, deceitful glory. Instead, I simply lifted my phone, my fingers steady, my face unreadable. The live stream was running. Her family was watching. The moment the realization hit her, Vanessa's expression shifted from shock to horror. Her eyes darted to the screen, the reflection of the live video playing in real time. The group chat I had set up was filled with frantic messages. Her mother's name flashed in the notifications, calling, desperate. Her father's furious words scrolled across the screen. Her sister's disbelief, her brother's disgust. It was all there, unfolding as mercilessly as she had been behind my back. No, she gasped, lunging toward me, her arms outstretched, as if she could somehow undo it all. Eric, stop, please. This isn't what it looks like. I stepped back, my grip tightening around my phone, holding it just out of her reach. It's exactly what it looks like, I said, my voice calm, detached. Her breathing was erratic, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She turned to Patrick, who was already scrambling to get off the bed. His hands fumbled as he grabbed his clothes, his face drained of all color. He wasn't looking at Vanessa. He wasn't defending her. He wasn't even acknowledging her pleas for help. No, Patrick was doing exactly what I expected, saving himself. You son of a... Vanessa started, but her voice broke as her phone vibrated violently on the nightstand. Another call. Another message, another reminder that her world was crumbling. Eric, please, she begged, reaching for my wrist now, her voice thick with desperation. We can fix this. We can talk. Just turn it off. I let out a quiet chuckle, a slow, deliberate one, the kind that sent chills running down her spine. Talk? I echoed. You had plenty of time to talk, Vanessa. Now everyone gets to hear the truth. Straight from the source. And with that, I turned and walked out, leaving her to drown in the wreckage of her own making. Vanessa's shriek echoed through the bedroom as I walked away, but I didn't stop. I didn't need to. The damage was already done. Her betrayal was no longer just my burden to bear. It was out in the open, exposed like an open wound for everyone to see. I moved through the hallway with unhurried steps, my mind eerily calm despite the chaos unraveling behind me. I could still hear the frantic rustling of sheets, the desperate shuffling as Patrick tried to gather his things. He was a mess. Fumbling with his shirt, stumbling as he shoved his legs into his pants, his hands shaking as he fished for his car keys. Where the hell are my shoes? He hissed under his breath, his voice barely audible over Vanessa's sobs. I didn't turn around. I ain't Carrie. By the time I reached the front door, I could hear her scrambling behind me, her footsteps light but rushed. She was coming after me. Eric, please, stop, her voice cracked as she chased me down the hallway. I paused at the threshold, gripping the doorknob but not turning it just yet. I wanted her to reach me. I wanted her to look me in the eyes and see what she had done, not just to me, but to herself. She reached for my arm, her fingers curling around my wrist in a weak, trembling grip. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see her out of the corner of my eye. Her face was a wreck, her usually flawless makeup smudged, mascara staining her cheeks in thick black streaks. Her lips, the same lips that had kissed another man just minutes ago, were parted, quivering. Turn it off, she begged. Please, Eric, my family. They're watching. My parents, my brother, Yes, I cut in smoothly, watching the fear ripple through her. They are. Her hands tightened around my wrist as she shook her head violently. You don't understand. This isn't just about us. You're ruining my life. I finally turned to face her fully, tilting my head slightly as I regarded her. No, Vanessa. You ruined your life. I just made sure everyone saw it happen in real time. A choked sob tore from her throat, her fingers loosened, her shoulders sagging as the weight of it all started crashing down on her. From the bedroom, Patrick finally bolted. He shot past us, his shoes still missing, his shirt half buttoned, his face burning with humiliation. He didn't say a word, didn't even look at her. He just ran. Barefoot, clutching his jacket like it was his last lifeline, Vanessa turned, her expression contorted with pure rage. "You coward!" she screamed after him. "You're just gonna leave me here after everything?" Patrick didn't stop. He didn't even hesitate. The second the front door slammed behind him, Vanessa whirled back to me, her eyes wild with desperation. "Eric," she whispered, shifting tactics. Her tone softened, her tears shining in the dim light. "You don't have to do this. We can fix this. We can talk. I can explain." I let out a breath through my nose, a humorless smirk playing at my lips. "Explain?" I repeated, my voice laced with amusement. "Explain what, exactly? How long you've been sneaking around? How many times you've lied straight to my face? How many nights you've let me hold you, knowing damn well you were in someone else's arms before that?" She flinched, and for the first time I saw something new flicker across her face. Shame. I took a slow step closer, lowering my voice as I continued. "The difference between you and me, Vanessa, is that I don't play games. I don't lie. I don't pretend to be something I'm not. When I love completely. And when I leave," I let the words hang for a moment, watching as her breath caught in her throat. "I don't come back." Her lips trembled, her fingers twitching at her sides like she wanted to reach for me but knew she shouldn't. "Eric, please." But I was already done listening. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my car keys, rolling them between my fingers as I turned back toward the door. "You'll want to answer those calls," I said flatly, nodding toward her phone, which was still vibrating relentlessly on the nearby table. "Your parents have a lot of questions, and I'm sure your brother does too. Hell, maybe your boss has already seen it. Should be an interesting conversation." Her face crumpled. She stumbled back a step, her arms wrapping around herself like she could shield herself from what was coming. I twisted the doorknob, stepping out into the crisp night air. The sky was clear, the street eerily quiet despite the storm I had just unleashed inside. I paused just before closing the door, looking back at her one last time. "You always said you wanted excitement," I mused, my tone almost contemplative. "Congratulations, Vanessa. You got it." And with that, I shut the door behind me, leaving her to drown in the wreckage of her own choices. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain from earlier in the evening. I inhaled deeply as I stepped off the porch, letting the coolness settle in my lungs. It was refreshing, a stark contrast to the suffocating weight of betrayal that had lingered in that house. Vanessa's muffled sobs still echoed behind the door, but they meant nothing to me now. I moved toward my car, my steps slow, deliberate. There was no rush. My work was already done. I had handed down my judgment without raising my voice, without lifting a finger in violence. The execution had been swift, surgical. No need for drawn-out arguments, no need for threats. I simply let the truth destroy her in the most undeniable way possible. As I reached for the door handle, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, already knowing who it was before I even glanced at the screen. "Vanessa." She had already called 6 times in the last few minutes. I ignored them all, but she was persistent. The messages had started pouring in immediately after I walked out. "Eric, please answer me. We need to talk. Isn't fair. I was going to tell you, I swear, you don't have to do it like this. You ruined everything. Please just come back inside." I smirked as another call came through. This time, I answered, but I didn't speak. "Eric!" Her voice was frantic, broken. "Oh, thank God. Listen, we can talk about this. You can't just throw away everything we've built. Please, just come inside. I know you're still out there." I let the silence stretch between us, let her desperation grow. Then, after a long pause, I exhaled softly and said, "Check the chat, Vanessa." A shaky breath, then frantic rustling, probably her grabbing her phone, scrolling through the group messages, seeing the flood of responses from her family. A choked sob broke through the speaker. "Oh my God, my dad, he..." Her voice faltered. I could picture it now, her father's words cutting through her like a blade, his disappointment heavier than any punishment I could have inflicted myself. He had been the one to push for our marriage, always saying I was the kind of man she needed, solid, dependable, someone who would take care of her. Now, she had to face him knowing she had obliterated that future with her own recklessness. "Eric," she whimpered, "they won't even. My mom won't even pick up my call. My brother called me, She stopped herself, her voice cracking. I leaned against my car, watching the glow of the street lamp flicker above me. "That's not my problem anymore, Vanessa," I said calmly. You should have thought about that before you spread your legs for another man in our bed. She sobbed harder. I swear, I didn't mean for it to get this far. It was just supposed to be fun, a distraction. It didn't mean anything. You mean everything to me, Eric. Please, just tell me what I can do to fix this. I almost laughed. The irony was rich. Now she wanted to fix things. Now she wanted to be the devoted wife, now that her world was caving in, but there was nothing left to fix. She had turned our marriage into a farce, and I had made sure she felt the weight of that decision in full. You can't fix it, I said simply. Silence. Just the faint sound of her breathing, ragged and uneven. Then, quietly, she asked, "Do you still love me?" For the first time in the entire night, I hesitated. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because there had been a time, a not so distant past, where the answer would have been a resounding yes. I had loved her. I had built my life around that love, built a home, a future. But now, staring at the shattered remnants of what we once were, the feeling was gone, not dulled, not buried, gone. I loved who I thought you were, I admitted, but that person doesn't exist anymore. A sharp inhale, a long pause. Then she whispered, "Please don't leave me like this." I shook my head even though she couldn't see me. "Goodbye, Vanessa." I hung up before she could say another word. As I slid into the driver's seat, I checked the group chat one last time. The messages kept rolling in. Her father, "You disgust me." Her mother, "How could you do this to Eric?" Her brother, "You're dead to me." And then one message from an unknown number. I tapped on it, my brows lifting in amusement as I read the words. "Patrick, man, listen. I didn't know she was married. I swear, please, let's just handle this privately. No need for things to get uglier than they already are." I smirked, shaking my head. Of course, Patrick would reach out. Of course, he would try to slither his way out of this mess. I typed out a quick response, too late. Then, with a satisfied exhale, I started the engine. As I pulled away from the house, I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel regret. I felt something else entirely. Freedom. The night stretched ahead of me, dark and endless, but for the first time in a long while, I felt weightless. As I drove down the quiet streets, the past no longer felt like an anchor dragging me down. I had cut it loose. I had burned it to the ground. And now, Vanessa was the one left standing in the ashes, choking on the smoke of her own destruction. My phone buzzed again. I didn't have to look to know who it was. She wouldn't stop. I had left her with nothing but consequences, and Vanessa had never been the kind of woman who could handle consequences. I could already imagine her pacing in our bedroom, still wrapped in those sheets she had so carelessly desecrated, her mind spiraling as she tried to piece together the wreckage of her once perfect life. She would try to salvage something. She would try to spin a lie convincing enough to undo what I had done. Maybe she would tell her family I was overreacting, that I had set her up, that it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe she would even try to shift the blame, convince them that I had pushed her away, that she had no choice but to find comfort elsewhere. But none of it would work. Not this time. Not when I had given her family the truth, raw and undeniable. I pulled into the parking lot of a quiet diner on the outskirts of town, a place I used to visit before life got too busy, before marriage became a routine, before love turned into something I could no longer recognize. Uh, the neon lights buzzed faintly, flickering against the windshield as I put the car in park. I needed a moment, not to think about what had happened. There was no doubt, no regret, but to sit with the silence of my own victory. I stepped inside, the scent of coffee and fried food wrapping around me like something familiar. The place was nearly empty, save for a tired-looking waitress behind the counter and a few late-night regulars who looked like they had their own demons to wrestle. I slid into a booth near the window, staring at the glow of the street lamps outside. The phone buzzed again. "Vanessa, Eric, please just talk to me just one last time." Or one last time? The words had weight. She knew it was over. I took a slow sip of the coffee the waitress had placed in front of me, watching the steam curl in the air. Then, against my better judgment, I picked up the phone and answered. I didn't say anything at first, letting her breathe through the silence. "Eric." Her voice was hoarse, fragile. "You're there, right?" I took another sip of coffee. "I am." A shuddering breath on the other end. Then, I. She broke off, as if she didn't even know where to begin. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything." A bitter laugh. "Oh, that's not fair. You can't just drop a bomb like this and walk away." I let my gaze drift to the street outside where a man stood lighting a cigarette under the glow of a street lamp. "I didn't drop anything. You did. I just made sure everyone saw the fallout." "You didn't have to humiliate me," she snapped suddenly, the desperation in her voice momentarily replaced with anger. You could have just confronted me. You could have. God, Eric, you didn't have to involve my family. I chuckled, but there was no humor in it. You were perfectly fine lying to me, sneaking around behind my back, making me look like a fool. But now that the truth is out, now that everyone sees you for who you really are, you can't handle it? I shook my head. No, Vanessa, I did exactly what I had to do. She exhaled sharply, her frustration mounting. I made a mistake. You made a choice. Silence. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, scrambling for another angle, another way to twist this into something survivable. And then her voice softened again. I don't want to lose you. You already dead. She let out a quiet sob, and for the briefest of moments, I almost felt something close to pity, but it passed as quickly as it came. I love you, she whispered. I sighed, rubbing my temple. No, Vanessa. You love the life I gave you, the security, the comfort. You don't love me. If you did, we wouldn't be having this conversation. More silence. Then a small, broken voice. What am I supposed to do now? That was the real question, wasn't it? Because everything she had built had been tied to me. Her reputation, her security, her stability. It had all been wrapped in the illusion of the perfect wife, the perfect marriage, and now, with one swift move, I had taken that away from her. I don't know, I said finally, my tone indifferent. But that's not my problem anymore. I ended the call and set the phone down on the table, staring at it for a long moment. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for months was gone. The burden of uncertainty, the gnawing suspicion that had kept me up at night. The quiet dread of knowing something was wrong but not having proof. It was all gone. I had all the proof I needed. And now I was free. I finished my coffee in silence, paid the bill, and stepped back into the night. The cool air felt good against my skin, like a fresh start, like the first breath of a new life. As I got into my car, I checked my phone one last time. One more message from Vanessa. Please don't do this. Please don't block me. Just let me explain. I exhaled slowly, my thumb hovering over the screen for only a second before pressing down. Block. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward a future where Vanessa no longer existed. The road stretched out before me, long and empty, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. The city felt quieter than usual, or maybe that was just the silence settling into my life now that Vanessa was no longer part of it. I had imagined this moment before, what it would be like to leave her, to be free of the lies, the betrayal, the weight of suspicion that had been crushing me for months. But now that it was real, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness either. I only felt a strange sort of peace, like something inside me had finally clicked into place. I glanced at my phone once more, even though I already knew what I would see. No more calls, no more messages. She had finally given up. Or maybe she was still trying to do damage control, trying to convince her family that this wasn't her fault. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what came next. I pulled into the parking lot of a hotel on the outskirts of town, a place I had already booked earlier that week when I first put my plan into motion. I wasn't about to sleep in the same house where she had betrayed me. That place no longer felt like home. It was just a structure, four walls, filled with memories that no longer meant anything. As I stepped into the dimly lit lobby, the receptionist barely looked up, sliding my room key across the counter with the kind of disinterest only night shift workers could perfect. I took the elevator to the fourth floor, my movements slow but steady. Inside the room, I tossed my keys onto the desk, shrugging off my jacket before sinking onto the bed. The mattress felt unfamiliar but not uncomfortable. It would do for tonight. For the first time in hours, I let myself exhale fully, running a hand through my hair. The exhaustion was creeping in now, not just from the night's events, but from everything leading up to it. Months of doubt, of watching Vanessa pull away, of seeing the cracks form but not wanting to believe what was right in front of me. I had spent so much time trying to be the perfect husband, so much time convincing myself that whatever was wrong in our marriage, I could fix it. But some things couldn't be fixed. Some things had to be burned to the ground. The soft buzz of my phone startled me, and for a moment I thought it was her again. But when I glanced at the screen, I saw a different name. James, my best friend. I hesitated for only a second before answering. You finally did it, didn't you? His voice was low, knowing. I let out a short laugh. Yeah, I did. A pause. Then, how do you feel? I thought about that for a moment, staring at the ceiling. Lighter. James sighed on the other end like he had been holding his breath for me. Good. You needed to get out of there, man. She was never going to stop. I know. And the live stream? You really went through with it? Damn right I did. James let out a low whistle. Brutal. I love it. I smirked, shaking my head. She deserved it. Damn right she did. And Patrick? He ran like a coward. Figures. James went quiet for a moment before saying, you should come by tomorrow. I've got a bottle of that bourbon you like. We'll drink to new beginnings. I considered it. A drink with a friend sounded like the perfect way to end this chapter. Yeah, I said finally. I think I will. James chuckled. Good. See you tomorrow, brother. As I hung up, I felt something shift inside me. The night wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. I stood, walking to the window and looking out at the city below. The lights stretched far into the distance, blinking against the darkness. It was a reminder that life kept moving forward, no matter how much it crumbled in the moment. Tomorrow, I would start fresh. Tomorrow, I would be untethered. And Vanessa, she would wake up alone with nothing but the consequences of her choices. A fitting ending. I pulled the curtains shut, climbed into bed, and closed my eyes. For the first time in a long time, I slept peaceful.